I came out of the Republican convention a couple of weeks ago as the little-known selectman from Hopkinton, which I think is a great title, and we embrace that title because it's the truth. We are little known, but we're a selectman in town, and we do a lot in Hopkinton and the surrounding communities, coordinating a lot of different efforts for people at the local level. And I think it's important that people in Washington, D.C. understand what happens in Massachusetts at the local level, because that's where we all live, whether it be Hopkinton or Billerica or somewhere else for that matter. I'm an engineer by degree. I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh, which is where I grew up in western Pennsylvania. I came here to Massachusetts right out of college in 1985. I have a master's degree in government that I got in 1994 that included a thesis that I enjoyed writing for about a year. I was working during the day and going to school at night. So I've been very interested in politics and government for a long time outside of my professional career, and talked quite a bit in 2012. I ran for Congress in 2010, so I've been active at the municipal level since 2000 basically. Ran for Congress in 2010 in what was then Massachusetts 3rd Congressional District, which was Jim McGovern's seat, and then it was a 5-way primary. I lost to the so-called Tea Party candidate in 2010, which was the year of the Tea Party crowd. But then he went on and didn't move the needle really in the general. So this isn't my first foray into federal politics. Learned a lot. Probably learned more losing that race than I would have learned had I won the race. And we're applying that knowledge to what we're doing this year. 2012, we talked about running again, but I didn't think the time was right for me and the kids. They were younger, and we had a couple things going on at home. And obviously, the politics of Massachusetts in a presidential year is different than it is in an off year. So we took a couple years off, but still kind of went around the state, met a lot of different people, and then really started thinking about this last October when Gabriel Gomez was pretty clear. So I talked about this when Gabriel got into that special last year, but again, the timing was a little bit off, and he was ready to go, and he was able to self-fund that thing, which I'm not able to do. I've got 5 kids, as I mentioned. There's no self-funding going on. But once he decided he was going to probably not run, we started talking about this seriously last October, November. Got in touch with the Baker team and the Polito team and all the others who are also considering it. And we're putting together this coordinated campaign this go around, which I think is very, very important because it pools resources, it pools staffing, it pools phone banking, it pools computers, assets, all those different things, and data. So we're working with that. And after that conversation and a couple of other different conversations, then several conversations at home, I decided to get in the race in January of this year. So that's kind of what's brought us to this point. I think it's going extremely well. We had a good reception at the Republican convention. Even though I'm a self-professed moderate Republican, I think we came out of there with some momentum. You know, I announced at the end of January, and it was like standing behind a freight train and pushing on the caboose, and it wasn't moving. That's what it felt like to me. But after we gave our speech and met a bunch of people and were well received, I felt the train start to move. And I do think the train is moving now. It's not moving very fast. But I also look at this as like it's a political marathon. It's probably like a political ultra marathon. But I know how to get through a physical marathon. And I think the same strategies will apply to this. We've got to pace ourselves. We've got to schedule this thing out. We've got to have some discipline in what we do, when we do it, and why. We've got to save a lot of energy, enthusiasm, and money for the last couple of miles, which is October and early November. We don't want to go out too strong, too fast, too furious at this point.
Do you have a pickup truck?
I do not, but my wife has a Suburban that doesn't beep when you back up, but it's like a bus, you know. No, I don't have a pickup truck. I have a Ford Escape, but no pickup truck.
Okay, so you're taking on Ed Markey, the so-called dean of the congressional delegation, and what do you do to rise above the that incumbency?
Yeah.
I mean, you're selectman in Hopkinton. You're going to carry Hopkinton, hopefully.
Yeah, I'll win in Hopkinton. I won big in Hopkinton in 2010.
But now you got to get your message out there, and what is that message?
Yeah. So I think it's really important, as I said early on, this is all about understanding Massachusetts and having experience living and working and paying taxes and driving the roads of Massachusetts, doing all the things we all do day in and day out. Mr. Markey lives down in Washington, D.C. He's been down there for 40 years. I'm 51. I was 13 when he went to Washington, D.C. He's been there ever since. He lives that way, and I think that's a big difference right there in itself. I'm a big believer in. I'm not a government hater. A lot of folks will come in and sit down in this room and they'll say, I don't like this about government. I don't like that about government. I don't. They just kind of go off about what's all the ills of government. I believe each level of government has a role. And I think the local role is for education, the state role is for certain things, and the federal role is for certain things. I think it's important that the federal government go back to some of its key functions, which I believe it has, and we should focus on. I think Mr. Markey is more inclined to suggest that Washington, D.C. can be the cure-all for everything, and I don't think that is necessarily the case.
What should they be focused on? You talk about healthcare. You think they should have you said the states.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to try and find universal, affordable health care. It's anything but affordable right now in Massachusetts. We've sort of gotten away from the conversation about affordability, and it's all been about getting health care out to everybody and getting people signed up at the national level through the different exchanges. But I think, if there's any way that we can get it to come back to the state level, you can't go down there today and say I'm gonna repeal Obamacare. That's just not going to work. The train there's another train that's left the station. So the key now in my mind is to try and redirect it back to the states where it can be managed better. I mean, I look at it from a business perspective, and the scalability of trying to do something like this at the federal level is just enormous. And I don't think that Oklahoma wants to do it like Massachusetts wants to do it. I know there's flexibility in there to some extent right now, but if Oklahoma doesn't want to do it, period, Oklahoma should be left out of the mix. And they shouldn't be penalized by their government if they choose not to get into it. I don't like punitive measures by government. Again, I'm not a government hater, but I believe that government needs to be reasonable in how it approaches things. And I don't think that trying to mandate this and then fine people and punish people to get into healthcare is the way to go.
When you were, you're still a selectman in Hopkinton.
I am, yeah.
How did the people on the local level feel about, the Obamacare? I mean, are they happy with it? Are they happy that they have access to health care, that other people have access to health care, that they're paying for other people to have access to health care?
I think people in Massachusetts in general want to help their neighbor. And I think we should help our neighbor, and I think it's incumbent upon us in this Commonwealth to do that from time to time. Public transportation, for example. I'm a big believer in public transportation, although public transportation doesn't always necessarily turn a profit like a business person would expect something to do. But I think there's some reasons why it makes sense for that. With respect to health care, yeah, I think the folks in Hopkinton would love to see all their neighbors taken care of. But they want to do it in a way that's reasonable and effective. And I don't think it's necessarily playing out to be reasonable and effective at this time. Massachusetts was on a path. The path wasn't ideal. It wasn't affordable, but then we got away from that affordable thing, as I mentioned before. But now we seem to be all about just blanket coverage. We're trying to throw it up against the wall, and hopefully it'll stick. And at some point we'll work on affordability. But I think the affordability piece is something we should work on now. But yeah, I do think Massachusetts people want to see something happen like this.
How many people do you employ at a construction company?
So I work for a big company that has 6,000 people there.
How have their health insurance? Is it improved? Is it the cost been reduced? Have they skyrocketed? And going back even to when Massachusetts first implemented, the healthcare 2003.
Yeah.
Under Romney.
Yeah.
I imagine those costs have continued to rise.
I try to keep my two worlds separate, my professional world and my political work, for various reasons. I think it's the right thing to do for my employer and for my profession and to feed my kids. That said, what we have at work is pretty good. It's not what it was. My monthly premiums are higher. My deductibles are higher. My out-of-pocket expenses, even though I have premiums and deductibles, are higher. Like every time I take the kids to the office or the doctor's office, and they all play sports, so we have had a broken collarbone, a broken ankle, and it was something else in the last 6 months.
So your company didn't get an exemption from the government?
My company did not get an exemption from the government, no. And neither did I get an exemption, and I still pay quite a bit for a big family that I have. It's not what it was. I worked for Westinghouse Electric Corporation right out of college, and Westinghouse Electric Corporation in 1985 had a great health care package, and we had a pension, and we had all those things. And the company I work for now is a spin-off of that, Wesco Distribution. But those things don't exist today. So it's definitely changed.
Besides, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but besides healthcare, I know, we editorialized against the Republican Party platform where they kept, they put something in this about same-sex marriage.
Sure.
And we said, Republicans just keep shooting themselves in the foot in this state. They want to go out and stick to these red meat issues when people are worrying about healthcare, jobs for their kids, opportunities, education. So now you call yourself described moderate Republican. I don't even know what that means anymore because.
So I'll give you my version of what a moderate Republican is.
How are you going to, if the Republicans who need every vote they can get, which includes the Tea Party people to get elected,
Sure.
and then you got to woo independents and maybe get some moderate or conservative Democrats to win a race. Okay, so the Republicans are fractured, right off the bat, and you call yourself a moderate Republican, and they just want to put a yoke around your neck on these issues, right? How do you break free and say, hey, this isn't? Because then you start sounding like a Democrat.
Yeah, the way you break free is you don't dance around the issues. You are who you are, and my wife's a kindergarten teacher. I am who I am, said Sam I am. And, I believe certain things. And some people say, well, why would you compromise your beliefs to be a moderate? I'm like, I'm not compromising anything. That's what I believe. There's no compromise there. I believe in states' rights. I believe in smaller government is better government. I believe effective and efficient government is good government. And I believe we can get there. So all those sort of fiscal discipline and states' rights issues and things of that nature, I'm a Republican. And there's nothing wrong with that. No one's going to argue that I want to spend your tax money better to make sure you get a return on that investment. But when it comes to individual liberty, yes, I believe in individual liberty. As a Republican and on the social issues, it's the same concept for me. It's the same mantra in my mind and same philosophy. So, I believe in individual liberty, accountability, and responsibility as a Republican, and I believe in individual liberty in your bedroom. Plain and simple. I believe in individual liberty and individual choices. Plain and simple. We have to be consistent. I think there are some people within the Republican Party that pick and choose when they want to have individual liberty and individual accountability. I don't think it should be like that. I think it has to be consistent across the board. So when it comes to the issues of those that you're describing there, I believe women have a right to choose. I always have, I always will. I believe in gay marriage. My brother-in-law is a gay man. He wants to get married someday. Great. I'm going to go to his wedding. I just think it's, we have to let people live their lives. I'm a big believer in live and let live. Our party is fractured, no question about it. But there's as many people, maybe a few less, on the far right that have opinions that are different than mine, as there are people on the far right that have different opinions than mine, and there's as many people on the far left that have different opinions as mine. So I think those two 10% groups over on either end of the scale tend to balance each other out. They tend to yell at each other, and they sort of deafen each other by constantly yelling. But there's a lot of people, across the political spectrum that have a different view.
Okay, so taking those social issues taking those off the table, where do you focus on differences or where you could do better than the sitting senator that's in there right now? What are the issues that you see that you could provide better, you could do a better job for the people of Massachusetts?
There is no question that I understand better what the people of Massachusetts want to do to educate their children. No question about it, and I think it has to happen at the local level. And then maybe some guidance and support from the state level. But the federal level, the folks in Washington, D.C. are not teaching my kids math, English, science, you name it. I think without question, my experience in the private sector, working in business, and having hired people and created jobs and looked at technology changes and done business plans and done all the marketing and things you do to create and build a business will help people of Massachusetts understand and help take a voice to Washington that can represent what needs to be done in the economy to grow it in a reasonable way. So back to the Republican question, I believe in free markets. I believe in capitalism. I believe in free enterprise. I believe in hard work and people that put themselves out there to get something done. And I think if you take that experience and that mindset to Washington, D.C., when they're talking about creating jobs, they just say we're going to create jobs. And what does that mean? they bloviate about creating jobs and doing all these things, but have they done it? Have they actually done it? And I would suggest the answer is no, they haven't. And I think a different experience level going to Washington, D.C. creates a better representative.
Excuse me, are you a full-time candidate, or are you still working in your?
Yes and yes. I'm a full-time candidate, and I am busy at work doing what I got to do, engineering and creating construction business. Yes. Yeah. Yesterday I worked, did several different things business-wise, and then traveled to Westfield, Massachusetts, traveled to Springfield, Massachusetts, and went somewhere else, all on the same day, on behalf of the campaign. So yeah, we're doing both full-time.
So your company, corporate-wise, is okay with?
Okay. Yeah.
What you're doing and
Yeah.
how you're doing it?
Okay is a fair word. Here's what they are.
Not
They
crazy
they
about it,
they don't
though.
really care what I do as long as the business continues to flow, because that's the role I'm in right now as an account exec. I can do what I got to do to get the job done, and the construction market, especially in downtown Boston right now, the union side is pretty strong, and I have a lot of union clients that I do business with, and they're pretty busy. So that's a good thing.
So is your wife happy with your running? She really?
My wife is completely behind this race. My wife was not behind the race for Congress in 2010. She didn't understand it as much as she understood the selectman role and some of the other things I do in the region there. And so she learned a lot in 2010 as well. In this race, she's absolutely 100% behind it, as are the kids. My two youngest said, "So is this going to screw up our skiing in any way?" Because they like to ski. And I said, "No, we'll figure that out for Saturday mornings for you." So I've had to make sure that they continue their skiing, but other than that, we're good. We're good.
When did the kids appear in their first ad?
So we've done a couple of things already where the kids are out there. We do a lot of social media stuff, and they're involved in that right now. My son's done little videos for me that he's put together. He did this one. The kids can go on with their iPhone. It's amazing what they can do. So there's a couple of videos if you look online and stuff. You'll see YouTube stuff. But he grabbed his song. He bought the song off whatever they buy it from, and then he put some pictures to it. It's called "The Story of My Life," and it's that new boy band that they got a song out right now. But it talks about my parents came from Ireland, and it kind of lays out this whole thing. It's pretty cool what he did. But no, the kids are into it, and my wife's very much very supportive. In fact, she's kind of like, "What's next? What are you doing next? Where are you going? What's going on?" She's pushing pretty hard.
Anyway, I want to go back. You briefly said something a few minutes ago about the role of federal education, the federal government teaching your kids. Give me an example.
So my wife's a teacher, and I have these 5 kids, and the teachers in the classrooms are the ones that understand and know my children better than anybody else, and they understand the little nuances of how they learn and what they should learn to advance. And when the federal government dictates, this is the program you're going to teach, and this is when it's going to be done by, and this is how you're going to test against it, I think that does a disservice to the students of Massachusetts. We've got great schools across Massachusetts compared to the rest of the country. But why we would have the federal government dictate what our curriculum should be and when it should be taught and at what pace and so forth, and then not back it up with any funding either on top of it all, I just think it's wrong. I think it's a local issue for local officials to decide, school committees and boards of selectmen and parents, and then you kind of take it up the ladder from there if you need some help. But to have it come from the top down, I just think it's wrong.
What should the Common Core?
Well,
States aren't doing it.
yeah, but the fact is there's still all these the government likes to say, this is what we want you to do, this is the mandate, this is what you need to play by the rules. Soon there'll be some kind of money tied to it. There's a lot of ways that they take the money from us and our tax dollars, and then before we get it back in any kind of supportive manner, there's all these other rules and regulations that come with it. I just disagree with that. I think that fundamentally, back to individual freedom, accountability, and responsibility, the closer we keep things to the people of our country, to our state, the better off we will all be. And I just don't like sending all this tax money to Washington, D.C., have it filtered and skimmed off the top 40, 50, to 60 to 90%, and what crumbs we get back comes back with all these rules and regs. It's not, in my view, the best way to govern, and it's not the right way to educate my kids. My 5 kids are different.
And each one of them has a little bit of a different plan for what they need for their education. How federal government, even VP Hill for that matter, can dictate how my 5 kids get educated, I think is not the best approach.
What's your district now, as opposed to what it was when you ran for Congress, as far as geographic layout?
Yeah, so for the U.S. Senate race, it's the entire state, right? The congressional district I ran in, 3rd congressional district, was basically central Mass from basically just west of 495, probably just south of Westford, down, it was Nikki's just kind of touched on the top right corner, but it came down 495 down into New Bedford, Fall River. When they redistricted, they took Hopkinton, which is it's a fairly big town geographically. We only have 16,000, 17,000 people, but geographically it's pretty big. And they kind of put it on an island, and it now is tied in with Newton and Needham and a lot of
Is that why the
towns.
congressional race wouldn't interest you now?
Yeah, it would not interest me because I don't think it's even close to being set up for a reasonable person to have a conversation with the voters. Not even close. Not even close. And Joe Kennedy III is our congressman today. He's a nice guy. I've met him a couple of times. You got to be realistic about these things.
Now, obviously, in your career, and even in your work, I mean, even as a selectman, I mean, that's got to be a non-partisan position, right? You run just as a selectman, okay?
It's interesting you asked that. We have partisan elections by law in Hopkinton, Massachusetts.
You do? So you have to run as a Republican?
I run as a
Oh, I
Republican.
didn't know
That's
that.
right, that's right.
There's like 6 or 7 towns I've heard. I've never run into any of the other towns. I've been all over the state. We have partisan elections by law, so each time I'm a Republican on the ballot.
So what's the makeup of that board?
Today it was 5 members. Today we have 3 Republicans, 2 independents that we like to say lean Republican, but we really don't talk politics like that.
No.
But that's how it is made up
No, my
as far as
point
registration
was-
goes.
My point was going to be, I mean, I think you talk to if you had the chance to talk to every Massachusetts voter, I would say 80% of them would say, gee, I want someone who can work with people on
Right.
the other side and stuff.
Right.
And yet, when they go into a voting booth, okay, sometimes I don't think they do that,
Yeah.
right? Unless they're thoroughly convinced that someone is going to, work with the other people and do what's best for Massachusetts
Right.
and stuff. So how do you get that point across that you're on a board that you have to work to solve local issues? Now you want to do that same formula and go into Washington, and they've heard it, and yet it seems, except for that lightning bolt that struck with Scott Brown, it's so hard. Even John Taney couldn't be the guy that was tainted, and
I wish to say.
To say it could be tyranny because right.
To say, I mean,
No,
it
it's
came awfully close, but and nothing against John Taney, but guy, it's just so overwhelming.
You're describing my job for the next 8 months. I have to convince the voters of that very point, and you're right. It's those
Debate
80%.
Mr. Markey, do you
I
get it?
love the opportunity to talk to Mr. Markey in front of large audiences and have a conversation about the differences in approach and things
Plus,
of
he's
that nature.
gonna ignore you, right?
I'm sure he will, yeah. I mean, why would he? I'm the little known guy from Hopkinton right now, of course he will. But I think over time we'll change that. Specific to what you do at the local level and how you transfer it to the federal level, that's exactly what I think is important, and that's exactly what I will bring to the party. I plan on shining a light on the fact that I've spent, 12 years, 13 years in local government working with people with different political affiliations, with different opinions, to find solutions to move our community forward. That's the job of a selectman. When I first got elected, I was literally the lone Republican. We had a dysfunctional board. Like many towns, we have our moments, we had a pretty dysfunctional board for a while. Every other week somebody was sending a letter to the ethics committee. And it was all sort of that silly interpersonality stuff, right? I got elected basically saying I'm going to conduct myself in a reasonable, responsible, respectful way, because that's what I believe and that's what I teach my children. And when I get there, I'll look at the issues and I'm going to try and run it like a business. That was the mindset. And when I first got there, I was the only Republican and there were 4 Democrats on the board. But I won the election that year and I was the high water mark for for votes out of it. There was two seats open, 3 people running, myself and 2 Republicans. I got like 3,400 votes. The other 2 got 28, 27, something like that. But when I got there was a lot of 4-to-1 votes. But I just made my point, voted yay or nay. Was typically in the minority. But slowly started to get people to understand there's a different way of doing things. They were forever saying to me, well, that's not how we do it here. That's not the way it's been done in the past. And that's not what local government's all about. And I always said, why? And I just kept asking that for a year. And then I got another person to run, and we had a contested race to unseat the sitting chairperson at the time. And then he won. So then we had 2 Republicans on the board the second year. And he's another reasonable, responsible, respectful guy. And with that second victory, even though it's a 5-person board and it's partisan, and the people look at some of these things, they appointed me to be the chair. I got elected to be the chairman. And then from that point forward, we did, in fact, run our meetings like we were running a business meeting. We ran our meetings and we had discussions about issues in a way that was different than just trying to line up, basically people having their opinions formed before they ever came to a meeting because of, quote, the politics. And we talked openly about all these different issues, and we started to change the mindset in Hopkinton and created a different environment. And instead of saying, well, that's not how we did things in the past, we would say, why do we do things like this? What can we do different going forward? We put hiring freezes in place. We put a new town manager in place that adopted this philosophy of running it like a business. This year, you'll see it in the papers if you watch the Metro West at all, this year we have an underride on the ballot that's coming up in May. The underride is the culmination of 5 or 6 years of running Hopkinton like a business and saying to our department heads, we're happy to support you. Come in and demonstrate to us why you need money. And with demonstrated need came a different approach to budgeting. And instead of always going to the full 2.5 allowed by law, we would come in at 1.8. We'd come in at 1.9. One year we came in at 0.9, I think it was. Don't quote me on the numbers, but we were under the 2.5 levy several years in a row, which built up what's called this excess levy. And the excess levy can sit there, and you can either let it sit there and someday go use it, or you can do an underride to reset the tax levy to the lower number. We've chosen to do the underride and give the voters a chance to reset the tax levy down so that future boards of selectmen can't come in and say, oh, there's all that money, I'm just going to go spend it on some project I want to do. So it's just a different mindset that we used. And it's that same mindset of working with people, being respectful, being responsible, and looking at it from a different perspective that I would take to Washington, D.C. and talk to my colleagues down there.
So now you're going from this level to this level, okay? And what are some of the, name two issues that you are really, really interested in? Do you think you can make an impact on the national level? Immigration, whatever, security, is there anything that really gets you that you say, this is why I'm running? If people really had to search your soul and say, this is what I want to do my first day on the job.
Yeah, they always tell you there should be 3 issues, right? Well, I have
2.
I have two. Because I believe, like I talked about in the reform of Hopkinton.
You have a cold today, so I don't want to attack.
Can you tell?
You do pretty well.
Like the reforms, I was strongly pushing, always with manners, but always pushing in Hopkinton. I believe we have got to put fundamental political reform into Washington, D.C., or we're going to talk about debt ceilings and fiscal cliffs and government shutdowns and all that other stuff for decades to come. I believe without question, and I know this has all been discussed many times before in the past. In fact, I wanted to do my thesis on term limits in 1994, and my professor said, no, everybody's talking about term limits, let it go, try something else. So I went into something else. I believe we absolutely have to put term limits in place for all federal office holders. I think without fundamental political reform, the same old games are just going to be played year after year after year, cycle after cycle after cycle. And the power of incumbency that you mentioned earlier is huge. It's running anywhere from 90 to 94% right now. So I believe term limits is an absolute must for American democracy. Not so much for Massachusetts, but for American democracy in the modern era. I think term limits is fundamental.
What would be a reasonable?
2 6-year terms for U.S. senators and 6 2-year terms, or let me get the math right, 3 4-year terms for U.S. representatives. Something along those lines. But 12 years, each office, Senate side, House side, off you go.
I think that gives you plenty of time to figure out what goes on down there, understand how the machines work, and get things done that you want to accomplish, and then get out of the way so somebody else can come in.
Okay, but Brian, you get elected this year, you'll be 63, you'll just be hitting your stride, okay? Really?
I hope
No,
so.
that's-
I hope so.
Well, as a politician, yeah.
As a politician,
Yeah.
I mean, just moving up the
There's-
ranks of
there's a-
seniority and stuff, okay?
There's other
So-
offices.
So, yeah, but say you're doing say you're the best thing that's ever come down the pike from Massachusetts. I mean, and then you say, well, I'm leaving off. I mean, I used to be a term limits guy. Now I just question it sometimes because I think it imposes restrictions on a person to be creative, to continue to be a watchdog. I think if that person is that type of person. So I don't know. I mean, look at people now are living into their 80s and 90s, and they're still being very, very creative in their own way. So unless you're going to run for president or something else, I mean, when you're 63, you want to go back to being an engineer. So that's the only thing.
I wouldn't mind going to the Cape and hanging out on the beach though either, right?
No, and that's.
But you'd have a unique problem because
But it's-
Massachusetts isn't
Yeah,
going to
I
give
can
up
see your point.
an incumbent
I can
Republican.
see
But it's not about me.
No, I know.
And I believe when people run for elected office, that, you know, a lot of times in campaigns, people end up talking, the candidates talk about themselves and their positions and blah, blah, blah. It really shouldn't be about the candidate. It should be about the people they're going to represent.
But just think, if you had the opportunity, like Mr. Markey, to be in Congress for 36 years, I'm just saying, your resume could be a lot different than his, okay? All right, I mean, this guy's been the classic underachiever. He brought the Telecommunications Act, which he said would bring competition and lower your rates. And I don't think anybody in this room is paying lower cable rates than when it first started.
Oh, it's killing me.
Yeah, and there's no competition, okay?
Yeah.
And those are the #1 people who support his campaigns and stuff like that, and he
Yeah.
continues to do this. But that's only a difference of opinion. That's fine that you.
But let me just
What else?
expand
Number 2.
beyond that for 1 second on term limits. And I'm not foolish about this or naive about how it has to work too. If I go down there tomorrow, okay, and Elizabeth Warren wants to stay there for 30 years, she's not going to vote for my term limits bill or to get a constitutional convention going. And McCain's not going to do it, and Boehner on the other side, they're not going to do it. So you have to be realistic about it. I think it would apply to the incumbents as well. They get another 12 years. I don't care if they've been there 40 years. The only way they'd ever buy into even considering something like this is if they get some more time themselves. So if I do it for 2 6-year terms because I'm new, starting in 2015 when I get sworn in, everybody else that's there today gets 12 more years from 2015 forward.
They get grandfather.
They get grandfathered, exactly.
Number 2.
Number 2, balanced budget amendment. I think the days of deficit spending and that's how we do it, that's the way we always do it, we can just keep it under a certain percentage of GDP, blah, blah, blah. I think those days are gone. The economy is wholly different than when we really got in that deficit spending mode. The hard capital goods that we produced as a country for decades, that's gone. We are now an information society. We're now an electronic society. We're a data society. Or an economy. We're in the information age, going, on steroids. And I think that the deficit spending and these enormous debts that can get racked up so fast are putting us in a huge challenge going forward. My kids, each kid right now, if they had to inherit their piece of the federal deficits at $70K, it's $350,000 for my kids alone, and they've done nothing yet, literally. So I'm very concerned about deficit spending and the national debt and what it's going to do to future generations. And I'm absolutely convinced, again, it's fundamental political reform because it will change how politicians behave. You've got to have a balanced budget amendment at the federal level. We've got it at the state level. We've got it at the local level. Your city councilors, your selectmen, whomever, they've got to balance the books. I think the federal government should do the same. And I don't think we need deficit spending to drive the economy anymore. That was a different time. Those are my 2 big things on political reform. There's other stuff, but those are 2 of the first.
Is America safer today than it was 8 years ago?
That's a tough question. I can't profess to be the expert in American security. I can tell you this: I've been involved very
Is your
intensely.
family going to go to the Boston Marathon and watch you run?
So they'll be at the start with me, yes. And I was going to
They have
say,
no qualms about going? or-
I've been in with federal, state, and local officials in meetings for the last 9 months getting ready for the Boston Marathon as a selectman. We stamp the parade permit. The parade permit comes with a security plan, and that security plan this year through executive session that I obviously can't get into is wholly different than what we've seen in the past. So yes, I believe that our residents will be safe on the Boston Marathon, but is America safer today than it was 8 years ago? I can't answer that right now. I sure hope so, but I'm not convinced.
Do you feel that America is as confident in its future today as it was 8 years ago?
No, absolutely not, and that's why I'm running for U.S. Senate. I mean, I just think we're on the wrong path, and I think America feels it's on the wrong path too, and I think even Massachusetts feels as if the federal government is going down the wrong path right now. I definitely think that we are headed towards a fiscal calamity, and with that fiscal calamity comes an economic calamity. They're interrelated, obviously, and there's great concern in Massachusetts and across the country about where we're going.
Do you have any military experience?
I do not.
Okay. Have you spoken to Scott Brown at all?
I have
Right.
spoken to him many times over the years. I've not spoken to him in the last month or so. He's been quite busy doing his thing.
Did he give
But
you any advice? Did you ever call him?
he's
for
always
advice?
shared advice, sure. He's not afraid to give advice. I get advice from everybody, let me tell you. Yeah, I've got advice from a lot of different people, and Scott's opined in the past. But not in this particular moment in this race right now.
Yeah.
At some point we'll probably sit down, but not right now.
Good. Any other questions, guys? Any questions for us?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and say hello. This is a long,
Yeah.
drawn-out process, and it's very early on in the game. But I think that if people give us an opportunity to be heard, and we do our work to get heard, I think we can gather some attention and some momentum, and I believe we can win the race. I absolutely do.